I buried my brother 42 years ago.
His name was Thomas.
Tommy, we called him. He was 19 when the Greyhound bus he was on went off the Coquihalla Highway during a January snowstorm in 1983. They told us 17 passengers died that night. Tommy was one of them. I was 23 when they brought the bodies to the morgue in Hope, British Columbia. I remember the fluorescent lights buzzing, the smell of antiseptic, the way the sheet looked like it belonged to someone else's tragedy until they pulled it back, and I saw a face I knew only in fragments. There was swelling, bruising, a gash across the forehead. I stood there with my hands shaking and told the coroner, "That's my brother. That's Thomas Carr." My voice sounded thin even to me. Then I had to call our mother and tell her the youngest son she loved was gone. I watched her fold in on herself, and something in me folded with her. We buried him. We planted his name on cold ground and tried, in the small ways we could, to move on. 42 years passed like one of those long, thin winters, each year indistinguishable from the next. I married Sarah. We had children. I built a life, a career, routines that kept the ache at bay. I visited the grave on quiet afternoons, said a prayer, and left. You learn to live around loss, not through it. Then last Tuesday at 2:01 in the morning, my phone rang. The number showed a 604 area code. I almost didn't answer. At 65, I have learned that nothing good comes from calls at that hour. Still, something, the same instinct that used to wake me when Tommy had nightmares as a kid, made me reach for it. "David? Is this David?" a voice asked, uncertain, rough, like someone who hadn't spoken to another living soul in a long time. But there was a thread under the roughness, something that made my stomach drop. "Who is this?" I said. There was breathing on the other end, heavy and labored. Then, "It's me. It's Tommy." For a second, I thought it was a prank. I dropped the phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pick it up again. When I did, the line was still open. I could hear him breathing. His voice was smaller than I remembered. "This isn't funny," I said. "Whoever you are, this is sick. My brother died 42 years ago." "I know," he said. "I know how long it's been. I figured out who I am. I found a newspaper clipping about the bus crash. There's a picture, and under it the name says Thomas Carr. That's me, isn't it?" The room tilted. For a beat, I couldn't breathe. "Where are you?" I managed. "I don't really know. Someone told me it's called the downtown East Side. I think I live in a shelter on East Hastings, but I don't remember how I got here. I don't remember anything before about 15 years ago. I woke up in a hospital and they said I'd been found on the street. I didn't have any ID. I couldn't tell them my name. He said he had flashes, feelings, and fragments. Snow, cold, people screaming, a house with a blue door, Mom making blueberry pancakes every Sunday. The details came back to me like fragments of my own youth. That blue door, the smell of syrup and batter on a cold morning. When he said blueberries, my throat closed. Tommy always ate twice as many pancakes as anyone else. "Do you remember what you look like?" I asked. "Any marks?" "Old," he said. "Weathered." I found a photo, though. I can see my eyes in it, the same eyes as Dad's. He paused, then. "I have a scar on my left forearm. I never knew where it came from." My heart pounded. Tommy had a scar on his left forearm from falling off his bike when he was 7, 12 stitches. I began to cry in a way I hadn't since the funeral. Hope and dread collided in my chest. "Give me your address," I said. "Where are you right now?" He gave me the name of a shelter on East Hastings. I wrote it down with shaking hands. I told him to stay put. He said he would wait. The line went dead. I sat in the dark for 30 seconds, and then I was moving, pulling on clothes, grabbing my wallet and keys. I told Sarah I had to go to Vancouver. She asked questions, but I couldn't answer them in a way that made sense. "I'll explain later," I said, and left. The drive from Kelowna to Vancouver took 7 hours, and every minute felt like a chisel on the inside of my skull. I drove with the radio off because I couldn't stand the noise. I thought about the morgue, the sheet, the face I had seen all those years ago, and convinced myself was Tommy. What if I had been wrong? What if I had identified the wrong body in my shock and grief? The thought was a kind of violence. It made me feel sick. When I arrived, the downtown East Side was worse than I'd expected. Boarded windows, people on the sidewalks, needles and the smell of freeze spray in the air. The shelter was a gray building that had clearly outlived better days. Inside, it smelled like industrial cleaner and too many wet coats. A woman behind the desk looked at me as if I were another stranger. "I'm looking for someone," I said. "He called me last night. Tommy. He used the phone." She nodded slowly. "Tommy, yeah, he was pretty worked up. Asked if he could use the phone, said it was an emergency. He comes and goes. Check the common room." The common room had mismatched chairs and a television on low. People watched, not interested. Then I saw him, sitting near the window, his back bent, hair gray and long enough to tie back. He wore an old flannel shirt. He looked smaller than I remembered. He turned for a moment. I didn't recognize him. His face was weathered, sun-browned, with lines that had been carved by years of rain and wind. There was a scar on his cheek I'd never seen before. He looked older than his years, but the eyes were unmistakable. Brown with threads of gold, the way they moved when he smiled. "The same eyes as our father, David," he said. His voice broke. "Show me your left arm," I said. He hesitated, then rolled up his sleeve. There it was, a faded scar, old and slightly puckered, where a boy once had 12 stitches. My knees buckled. I gripped the table to steady myself. The man in front of me smelled like the street and carried the weight of decades. But the scar and the eyes knit the impossible into something I could touch. He told me pieces of his story in a voice that sounded like winter. He remembered nightmares about snow, the sensation of falling, waking up in a hospital in 2010 with no ID and no memory. He remembered being beaten and robbed, he said, and then long blank stretches. The doctors at clinics had told him head trauma and dissociation could explain gaps in memory. For years he drifted, sleeping in shelters, doing day labor when he could, surviving in the margins. He said that 6 months ago a volunteer at the shelter had been sorting old newspapers and left one open. The date was January 1983. The photo of a young man with a grin he'd known once flickered something inside him, and a name. Thomas Carr clicked into place. I didn't want to believe him, and I couldn't imagine not believing him. We went to a private lab that afternoon and did sibling DNA testing. The technician said results would take 48 hours. I booked us a hotel near Stanley Park and watched him reclaim small rituals. A hot shower, a shave, eating a slice of pizza without the smell of fear in his hands. For the first time since the phone call, there was a sliver of calm. He slept hard, the kind of sleep born from exhaustion and relief. The next 2 days were a collage of small things. A walk around the park where his steps were cautious, breakfast at a diner where he ate like a man who hadn't seen a full plate in months, quiet conversations about colors and smells that seemed to anchor him to a life he could not recall. He asked questions about what he had been like as a child. I told him he used to bring home stray cats and cry when you squashed a frog by the roadside. He wanted to be a veterinarian. He loved our mother's laugh. When the lab called, my hands fumbling with the phone, my world narrowed down to one line. "Mr. Carr, the probability of siblingship between you and the tested party is 99.97%, the technician said. Conclusive. I sat down hard on the hotel bed. The man across from me, exhausted, lined, fragile, started laughing and crying at once. "I'm Tommy," he whispered, as if trying on a shirt, feeling the seams. "I'm Thomas Carr." A doctor at the free clinic later explained what she thought had happened. She had seen signs of old head trauma, a depression in the skull, healed fractures, scarring consistent with long-term injury. She thought that Tommy had survived the original crash, wounded and possibly unconscious, and been taken by someone who, for reasons unknown, didn't bring him to the authorities. He had been used, possibly for labor in remote operations, or abandoned by people who saw him as disposable because he had no memory, no ID. Years of hard labor, malnutrition, and untreated injuries had aged him beyond his years. At some point, he had been left or escaped and ended up in Vancouver, surviving however he could. Hearing that made my stomach hurt. I felt sick for the boy on the bus, for the young man lying in a hospital bed in 2010 who couldn't remember his name, and for the mother who had spent the rest of her life mourning a son who was alive and alone. She died 10 years ago, still carrying a grief that was, as it turned out, based on a mistake we had all made in shock. The thought of her not knowing is a knife that twists. That grief is a complex thing now. Grief for the lost years, grief for what might have been, grief braided with the shock of what is. We brought him home to Kelowna. Sarah opened the door and hugged him like she had known him forever. She said, "Welcome home, Tommy," and his shoulders sagged with something between relief and disbelief. The first week was both small miracles and raw moments. He slept without pacing, but he woke with sweating nightmares. Loud noises made him flinch. Crowds overwhelmed him. He remembers small things in fragments: the taste of Mom's blueberry pancakes, the dog we had when we were children, the narrowness of our childhood kitchen. Some days he remembers more. Other days the memory slips away like fish through fingers. We decided not to rush anything. Dr. Walsh, the trauma specialist, recommended a slow program. Regular therapy sessions twice a week, occupational therapy to rebuild routines, social workers to help with benefits and paperwork, and family counseling, so we could all learn how to be brothers and members of a family again. She explained gently that genetics make someone your brother, but years of survival and harm make them a different person too. "He is genetically my brother," she said, "but he's also someone new, someone molded by 42 years of hardship. There are practical things to deal with. The grave with his name is still in the cemetery in Kelowna. We've talked about it more times than I can count. Do we remove the headstone, change it, leave it as a memorial to the 19-year-old who got on a bus that day? For now, we've left it as it is. It feels right to have a place for the old grief to rest while we build new memories in the present." We explain to the kids gently, and the grandchildren come by with questions and shy smiles. My youngest grandson has decided Tommy is his best friend. He sits on the porch and listens to stories about tractors and mud and blue doors. Tommy lights up like a night lamp when the kids are around. Tommy has started working part-time at a garden center. He digs, he plants, he talks to people like they're old friends, maybe because soil doesn't press him for memories it cannot give. He comes home with dirt under his fingernails and a quiet pride. He helps in small ways around the house. Sometimes he gets frustrated when a memory won't come, and that's when we sit with the silence and breathe together until the moment passes. At night, he attends therapy and slowly reconstructs pieces of identity. Some of it is bleak, some of it is funny. We've learned that our relationship is composed of thin, careful threads right now: trust, patience, repetition, and that those threads can grow stronger. People ask me how I feel about everything. The truth is complicated. I still grieve for the life Tommy should have had. I mourn the birthdays, the family meals, the graduations we didn't share. I grieve the fact that Mom never knew he was alive. That ache is a constant companion. But alongside that sorrow is an overwhelming gratitude so sharp it sometimes makes me dizzy. Gratitude that I answered a phone in the middle of the night. Gratitude that a yellowed newspaper finally sparked a person to remember his name. Gratitude that a boy I thought I had lost forever is sitting at my kitchen table telling stories about stray cats and old homework. If there is a lesson in all of this, it is not simple. It is that human lives can twist in ways that are unimaginable, that grief can be both fair and mistaken, and that hope, even when it seems foolish, deserves a chance. Family is not only what we remember. Family is what we choose to do every day: to show up, to listen, to forgive, to make space for someone who has been broken, and to help them be whole again in the way they can. Tommy may never recover everything. He may always carry scars that no therapy can erase. But he is here. He is alive. He is learning to be my brother again, or perhaps learning with me how to be brothers for the first time. Some nights we sit on the back deck and watch the sky, and he will look up and ask, "Do you think Mom knows I'm alive?" I tell him, "Yes, I think she knew." We both look at the stars, and for a while the world feels right. Answering that phone changed the shape of our lives. It has reopened old wounds and created paths toward healing. It has forced me to reckon with guilt and to practice forgiveness. It has given us a second chance that I never believed possible. And for that, despite everything, I am profoundly grateful.